Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Sassi, and I actually work with Pila, who was your last presenter. I was supposed to be in Raleigh live, but my schedule changed a little bit, and now I'm doing it virtually. So thank you to those of you who were able to join us. My talk is on building a diverse and inclusive community based on some of the experiences that I've had in my career and my life, as well as some of the challenges that I've run into. So let me just get my my screen up. And I think, Amber, if you could allow me to be co-host or allow me to share my screen, that would be super.
Uno momento, we'll get that fixed.
Thank you.
There you go.
All right, super. Okay, good. Looks like it's working. Let me just put this into presentation mode. And then, Amber, are you able to see my screen that says community building? Well, it should say community building, but what happened there? Hold on one second. I can't allow that to be there. There we go.
I'm so glad it's not just me.
It's not. It's absolutely not. All right, cool. So I hope you can see the screen now with the correct spelled word. All right. So, I think, we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, but how do we build a diverse and inclusive community? I work at IBM. I work in the IBMZ division of IBM with Pila, your last presenter, and I gave myself this fun little job title called the Chief Penguin. So for those of you who obviously are here at All Things Open, you recognize that the penguin is our kind of mascot, if you will, if one can say that. And since I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who are very passionate about open source, and I work with a lot of students who either are very passionate about open source or they will become, after engaging with me and my team. And I have the wonderful opportunity of working on our student and entrepreneur experience team. For those of you on Twitter, you can find me at Mentor Africa with a K. Enter at your own risk. I am someone who brings my whole self to everything, whether that's work or outside of work. And I mix a lot of both together. Let me tell you a little bit about me. So I'm also a CEO and founder. I have my own youth-led nonprofit, and we've taught tens of thousands of young people to code in 12 countries. It's called Mentor Nations. And we have a co-working space, a robotics lab, and an IoT lab in Tunis, Tunisia. For those of you who are not familiar with the continent, it's in North Africa, sandwiched in between Algeria and Libya. And I started this really based on some things that I, experienced and heard from my own family, where my children who grew up on the continent and, lived in Tunisia did not have access to computers in their classroom. They had one that they would share across 30 to 40 young people. So I set out on this mission in my prior role when I was at Microsoft to empower them with devices in the classroom. And what started out as 30 computers ended up snowballing into 400 computers in 20 schools and a digital skills movement. I'm extremely passionate about the power that digital skill building can bring to young people, and starting out early, really thinking about coding as a creative form of expression and like cultural heritage or art, if you will. I've brought a lot of those thoughts and thinking into my role at IBM and really created a role that didn't exist before. I consider myself both an entrepreneur, where I'm the CEO and founder of the company I mentioned, but also an entrepreneur, where I'm innovating and creating inside of someone else's company. I run a startup program. I work with 100 startups in all different types of industries, from fintech to health tech to insurtech, I also am working together with Timbaland. For those of you who are familiar with Timbaland, he just won Time's 100 Most Influential People in the World. He's a music producer who's worked with the likes of Madonna and Jay-Z, Alicia Keys, Justin Timberlake, all kinds of very famous music, singers and songwriters, musicians. And he's got a new startup where he is democratizing access for your bedroom producer, your basement producer, to really streamline how they're making beats, getting access to acapellas and music and all kinds of really, really interesting things. We're in the process of implementing a smart contract solution, as well as looking at their IP and investing in data protection, privacy, and security in a way that would almost align to what you might see in heavily regulated industries, where for them, having a breach is the last thing they want to experience as a startup. So really fun stuff that I have an opportunity to work on there, where we are helping startups to build and scale. I'm also a youth engagement, evangelist. So I believe in putting youth at the center. And I have built, my team and my career around how do you really truly have youth at the center of anything and everything that you do. I'm a creator, I'm a maker, I'm a doer, and I also don't necessarily believe in being handcuffed or having hierarchies in place that prohibit me from going to talk to my GM, for example, who within the world of IBM is, extremely senior, thousands of people on his team. He runs the P&L for my entire division. I don't believe I should be prohibited from going and engaging with him directly. Similarly, I engage with our, chief technology officer of, our cloud organization, or our, chief marketing officer of our cloud division. And why I make this important point is because I think that a lot of times when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we think about, where are we and who should we or should we not be talking to? And I know in some organizations, it's political suicide to go above your boss, to go and skip chains. And I, have been fortunate enough to land in a spot within IBM where I have the ability to go out and make the impossible possible, bring my ideas to fruition and share big, bold ideas, but also be in a position where if I fail, it's okay. I also believe in something that we'll talk about in a minute. It's called a Thrive Hive, and that's who is your squad? Who is that group of people who are your kind of infectious cheerleaders? Now, I think that there's a place for constructive feedback, but I think it's really important that we have this group of people around us. I think this is especially important for women, to have this group of people around you that are, reminding you that you belong, you deserve a seat at the table, you didn't get there by accident, and no, you're not an imposter. So let's jump in. I've talked enough about myself. So when it comes to, building a community, I kind of see it as 6 steps. And we'll dive into each of these in a second. And this really seems straightforward, like in any, endeavor that you take on. It's kind of like, okay, great, let's define what our vision is. Where do we want to be? What are our gaps? What are the things that we need to change or learn or improve upon to get us to where we, want to be? And then I see it as, building a plan to fill in those gaps. Gathering your Thrive Hive together. I mentioned Thrive Hive is your group of, your network, your close network. Then I believe that it comes off into starting small and then testing and learning, but having empathy throughout. I had an opportunity today to take part in a Twitter chat that was all about driving diversity and inclusion, in tech or in STEAM. And, there were a lot of questions around, why does diversity and inclusion matter? I think that, if you're not reflective of your audience, you're not going to be able to create products and solutions that truly, inspire them, that resolve their pain points, that bring them joy, because you're not necessarily going to understand. And I use the example of often, let's say, for example, I decide to create a mobile application that helps the blind. But let's say I'm not blind and I have my team, doesn't consist of anyone who is blind, and we didn't go out and talk to anyone who is blind. How are we truly going to create a product, a solution, a service, for a group of people that we haven't talked to, we're not a part of, and may not and likely do not understand? All right, perfect. So let's jump in. So first thing, as I mentioned, is define your vision. So that's, where do you want to be and what does success look like, in both the near and the far term. And I'll give you a couple of examples of some things that, I did and I looked at, as I kind of moved on in my journey. So for those of you who are not aware, less than 3% of venture capital goes to female founders. And the numbers are equally dismal for founders of color. And that's a number from the US, by the way. But, despite that number being from the US, there are similar percentages around the world, as well as in, a multitude of different countries. And, many of us have seen these stats before, that women make up 28.8 actually percent of the workforce. And that's a number from last year. And that number came from Nita Borg Institute, if I'm not mistaken. So big challenges there as well. And how did I respond to this? I looked at this and said, wow, I have an opportunity to come in and build a startup program within IBM. That was what I was hired in to come in and do. And the ask from my leadership team was, come in and build a startup program, create a long tail revenue solution to introduce startups to our platform. And I responded to that by creating a startup accelerator focused on enabling startups to build and scale. We give them $120,000 in cloud credits, 2 years of technical mentorship, 1 year of business mentorship, and a lot of marketing support that goes along with that. And in my first year, my number of Black founders, my number of female founders were, they were dismal. And I realized that it wasn't just the industry that was broken, it was also the work that I was doing in my team. I also noticed that a lot of the ways that we were introducing our technology to young people kind of skipped all the preliminary steps of inspiring young people, to especially women and girls, to think about computer science, and doing so in a way that made it like a creative form of expression or an art form. And that led me to kind of thinking about, all right, we've got these big gaps. We have this platform that may not necessarily be, targeted appropriately to, women and girls. And we also were not necessarily targeting our program to think about, female founders or founders of color. Thankfully, I was able to, showcase some of the results of the program and showcase some of the industry statistics. And that led me to, making some big asks of my leadership team. I ended up creating my own job. I ended up creating my own, job title and my own role. And that was, not only bringing startups and students into our ecosystem, but also making sure that we were truly diverse and inclusive and living up to our, company mission and culture and values of truly being, diverse and inclusive. If I think about that second step, identifying your gaps, when I looked at identifying my gaps, I looked at, okay, who's doing it? Who's doing it right? Is anyone doing it right? And one of the things I thought about was, is my team, are we reflective of our audience? If I looked around and looked to the left and looked to the right, did I truly have a diverse and inclusive team? And when I first started, I was a one-woman band. It was me, and I had some external support. And the external support that I have, as much as they were, wonderful individuals. My entire team, besides me, were white males, and this was my outside vendor. And as I was looking through, some of the proposals that came through, or some of the applications that came through for my startup program, I noticed a significant gap when it came to female founders and founders of color. And after a full day of interviews, one after the other, after the other, after another, for an entire day, my partner said to me, how do you think it's going? We've seen some great use cases. We've seen some great startups. And I'm like, yeah, but the whole day has went terrible. And he said, what do you mean it went terrible? And I said, what did you notice that was lacking? And he couldn't figure it out. He wasn't able to see it. It was I guess, unconscious bias that he had. And I said, there were no female founders and no founders of color. And, after that conversation, he felt, I think, quite taken back that he didn't notice it. And he felt like he should have noticed it and he didn't. And, it really, got me to thinking about, what is our current state, and where do I want to be, and how do I make sure that my team is reflective of my audience? So it required me to adapt. It required me to change. This failure, if it will, gave me this constant feeling of failure. And instead of seeing it as, I failed and I didn't get the results that I wanted to get, I allowed that to fuel my passion for change. And I allowed that to bring to light a conversation with my leadership team to say, is this reflective of our values? Is this what we want to do? And my team had a lot of questions around, what can we do? How can we do it? And I took a lot of time to sit back and learn. And I took time out of my everyday to listen to the community, with empathy, and to, really learn, new things, and really learn anew. And that inspired change. I, made some changes, when it came to our vendor base. I made some changes in terms of, who I was working with across the team, both internally and externally, and made sure that our team was truly reflective. Zahra, I'm doing a call. Please turn the ice off. Sorry, guys. That my team would be, reflective of my audience. So my next thing was then, all right, I got to get to the plan. Like, I got to do something. I can't just talk about it and sit back and talk to people and learn what they were doing and learn what was going well and who was doing, the right thing. I looked at those tactical steps to get me to where I need to be, who's doing what support I needed, and, do I have the budget to go where I want to go? Had to do a lot of persuading. I asked for more budget to support both my entrepreneur and student segments. And I demonstrated the impact that this would have on our KPIs, how investing in diversity and inclusion and the inclusion of a different segment of student than we were used to looking at, how that would drive business results. I over communicated, I shared my goals and objectives for greater diversity inclusion with everyone everywhere, so that it was top of mind. I also got a Scrum Master certification to help me better manage my work deliverables, my timelines, my milestones, and my KPIs. Thankfully, that's not my day job. I would make a terrible Scrum Master if that were my day job. That said, I made a concerted effort to, better understand how I could do a better job to manage projects and keep the train on the track, so that we weren't just talking about achieving things, we were actually getting things done. Then that came to kind of gathering my Thrive Hive, or my group of supporters. I spoke with everyone that I know, around, where can we collaborate? How can we collaborate? What can we do together? And I networked to meet new people who are also, passionate about, the student segment and bringing diversity and inclusion into, into tech from a university or community college or high school perspective. I did the same thing on the startup program. Who's working on, diversity and inclusion when it comes to female founders or founders of color, the indigenous community, or, what have you. And I didn't compare myself to others who I thought were maybe doing a better job than me. I looked at that as an opportunity to elevate them and learn from them, not compare, because I realized that my chapter, my chapter 5 shouldn't be compared to someone else's chapter 25. And I'm just going to check in the chat window to see if we have any. Okay, cool. All right. So I think we're good on that. So then, more persuasion in action. I started establishing, and I hate the word influencer, but I felt like it was kind of the best thing to describe what I was after here. I collaborated with individual influencers. I made a point to meet anyone and everyone I could who were in positions of power, whether that included associations, non-government agencies like the UN, or government entities like USAID, and many others that are advocating and having on-the-ground activities relating to diversity and inclusion in tech, digital skill building, digital inclusion, the startup community, nonprofits, and other companies with like-minded goals. As the next Microsoftie, I reached out to everyone I knew at Microsoft, to talk about, what are you doing in the accessibility space? What are you doing in the youth empowerment space, or the digital inclusion space, or the startup space? Even in areas where we might compete in this area, we were all in on it together. I made a point of meeting new people, and I actually followed up. How many times do we see a speaker at an event, we look up to them or like what they had to say, but we never follow up through social media? I made a point of taking down the names of people who I saw doing talks and having insightful things to share that were, like-minded to me. And I made a concerted effort to reach out to them. Again, I asked for more money. I did that again this year. And I demonstrated the impact that diversity and inclusion would have on our KPIs, and how it did impact our KPIs from the year before. And I got the extra budget. I incorporated a lot of storytelling and personal branding, into my my message, both inside IBM and outside of IBM. I started small. I took on some small tests at first, and I looked at crawl, walk, run, fly approaches with different organizations and different tactics, and I documented where I could have done better, and focused on being what I call a learn it all. And, that really kind of forced me to put my design thinking cap on. I learned how to facilitate design thinking sessions to understand, our audience insights, their pain points, their frustrations, their joys, their aspirations. I brainstormed, and I took on, as I mentioned, small tests. I spent a lot of time reading. I did a lot of reading on emotional intelligence to really make a point of understanding myself and my emotions, as well as the emotions of others, recognizing that diversity and inclusion and empowerment, enablement, all of these different things are interesting topics today that can be very emotional in nature, and very crucial, and tried to up my empathy game. I also looked at, how can I share my skills forward? I created a future of work and entrepreneurship learning series to bring new audiences into tech. And that was all about, how do I take the knowledge and skills that I have, even if it's unrelated to IBM, even if it's unrelated to my startup program, and started using that as a way of bringing new audiences into tech, creating a different kind of community by enabling them to gain new skills in the areas of what I call the trifecta of skills. And that's technology, or tech skill building, or digital skills, habitudes, what I call habits and attitudes, your professional development skills, and then entrepreneurial spirit, where each of those buckets have 8 different competencies that I go out and teach mostly every week. And then I tested and learned. I was very KPI focused on how my small tests would impact results. I repeated what worked, and I changed what didn't work. So, that's really been about lifelong learning and developing a growth mindset. And I spent a lot of time reading, as I mentioned, from experts both within and outside of tech. I reached out to authors, I reached out to professors, and I just spent as much time learning as I did deploying. I worked hard to build a personal brand. I'm not all the way there, and who knows if I've done a good job or not, but I try to collaborate with like-minded people. So if you're interested in this topic and you would like to collaborate, I mentioned my Twitter handle. You can always feel free to reach out there or through LinkedIn. And I always try to learn new things from others, because who is going to know better about how to, bring more women and girls into tech, for example, talk to women and girls. But it's also important for us to think about our allies, or if we're talking about creating a more accessible community, how do you talk to people who have specific accessibility needs? Regardless of that, I'm always authentic. I shared what I was working on with everyone everywhere in ways that were authentic to me, to kind of build what I consider fans and advocates both within IBM and outside of IBM for what we were trying to do when it comes to building a more diverse and inclusive student base as well as entrepreneur segment. So it's not about what you did last week. It's not about what are you going to do next week. You have right now to take action. And that's what I focused on, is where did I fail last week? Who cares? As long as I learned from it. Am I going to be worried about next week? No, who cares? Let's focus on the here and now, be mindful, and celebrate the small wins that we have each and every day.